Mr. Hitchens, are you a closet believer?
No, a point of agreement between the rabbi and myself is that the human species, mammalian, primate, so on, though it undoubtedly is, and made out of the dust of exploded suns, does have a need for, I would say, the transcendent, would be one word, the numinous, even the ecstatic. Wouldn't trust anyone who hadn't felt this. And it has obviously to do with landscape, light, music, love, and I think also a permanent awareness of the transience of all things, and the melancholy that invests all this. So it isn't just gaping happily at a sunset while listening to music. You're doing that knowing that it can't last for very long. Very important part of the awareness. People who didn't have this would, I think, be beyond autistic. But there's no need for the supernatural in this at all. There is no supernatural dimension of which this gives you a share. And yes, of course, for poetry and literature, we are rather stuck with the pathetic fallacy, if you know what I mean. The pathetic fallacy is giving human attributes to material things. So we're tempted to do that too.
Rabbi, can Hitchens be saved?
Just on the word evil, though, I personally find it a word you absolutely have to have. I decided this in Iraq, as a matter of fact, after I'd seen the Saddam Hussein's attempt with chemical weapons to destroy the Kurdish people of northern Iraq. I'd seen the, as it were, the stench of evil. I thought, now everything else that you can say about Saddam Hussein, psychopathic dictator, mass murderer, genocidalist, bad guy, as some people used to call him, things of this kind, wasn't up to it. There was a surplus value to totalitarianism, a sort of a numinous bit, a shimmer around it, that meant that evil is a word we could not do without.
Mr. Hitchens, you are likely the world's most charming, roguish, and enlightened atheist, and I love you for that. But as a Sufi Muslim, I'm very ruffled by the title of your book. Of all the titles that you likely had at your disposal, did you have to settle for the literal negation of Allahu Akbar?
Yes. I thought so.
Thank you for that question. Thank you. Oh, it's a very good question, and I'm glad. I wanted to come back to it. Why?
Yeah. As I've said, I think that all religions are wrong in the same way, in that they privilege faith over reason, but they're not all equally bad in the same way all the time. I mean, if I'd been writing in the 1930s, I would certainly have said that the Roman Catholic Church was the most dangerous religion in the world because of its open alliance with fascism and anti-Semitism, which the damage from that our culture has never recovered from and never will. But at the moment, it's very clear to me that the most toxic form that religion takes is the Islamic form. The horrible idea of wanting to end up with Sharia, with a religion-governed state, a state of religious law, and that the best means of getting there is jihad, holy war, and that Muslims have a special right to feel aggrieved enough to demand this, I think is absolute obscene wickedness, and I think their religion is nonsense. And
in its
entirety. The idea of God speaks to some illiterate merchant warlord in Arabia, and he's able to write this down perfectly, and it contains the answers to all human. Don't waste my time. It's bullshit.
But you're saying the same about it.
Also, that God speaks. The Archangel Gabriel speaks only Arabic, it seems.
I just want to say, in retrospect, you were very civil, actually. I don't know what I was thinking.
Is this the same characterization of all religions?
Well, actually, no, because remember, Islam makes one special claim for itself. All religions claim to be revealed truth. They all are founded by divine revelation. But Islam rather dangerously says, ours is the last and final one. There can't be any more after this. This is God's last word. Now, that's straight away a temptation to violence and intolerance, and if you note, it's a temptation they seem quite willing to fall for.
Rabbi,
Second,
do you have any quarrel?
I had another motive. Which is this. If you remember Dick Gregory, the older comrades here will, great black comedian and civil rights activist, when he came to write his memoir, he called it
Right.
It upset a lot of people, including his old mum, who called him and said, why are you doing this? And he says, Mama, every time you hear that word again, they're selling my book. So every Allahu Akbar reminds people that we're in a very serious struggle with a very depraved religion. And that help is available.
Friend, you Give no quarter?
Look, he believes in the prophecy of Muhammad. I'm sorry to say, I think he's been, at best, conned. Yeah.
I want to interrogate you, Rabbi, because you, in your earlier discussion and your answer to a couple of the questions, you seem to suggest that if there's something beyond the material, that's evidence for God, or it, and then on the question of whether there can be moral behavior, one can have a reason to act morally, you say that only, that requires the existence of God. If there's no if God doesn't exist, you don't believe in God, you don't have reasons to behave.
I'll explain. The difference is not whether people in their own minds have compelling reasons to act morally. The question is, if you don't believe in God, and you say, you know what, I'm going to, why would you do good in secret? As Balzac put it, perhaps only believers in God do good in secret. Now, obviously, that's not true, but you understand the ideology behind it, which is, if you don't believe that there's a universal moral code that comes from beyond us, and that human beings make up what's right and what's wrong, why is it that I, as a human being, can't decide this is right for me, even though I know it's going to be wrong for anyone else? In other words, the standard that arises only from human beings is easily broken by human beings, whereas if you think that goodness is woven into the fabric of the universe, which is what a believer says, then it's always wrong at all times, in all places, whether someone's watching or they're not watching, whether you're a believer or you're not a believer, that's always true, and that's the distinction I was trying to get at.
I was very struck, because this is the core question, so we might as well revisit it. I was very struck this week reading, I'm sure you saw it, the Pope's brother, Monsignor Georg Ratzinger, who runs the choir school in Regensburg. Yes. He's discovered recently there's been some unpleasantness at this school, of which he was the steward for about 20, 30 years. He said he didn't know about any of that, and sure he claims not to have taken any part in it, but he said he did used to smack the boys around quite a lot. He said until Bavarian law changed and made it illegal for teachers to hit children. Right. I thought, well, I don't want to be told anymore that without religious people we wouldn't know what morality was. He didn't know this until the secular law intervened and taught him how to behave. Now, wait. What is the church, what is the whole racket of the church in this? Protecting itself from it, saying, they were all ordered, don't go near the courts, don't go near the police, we'll sort this out among ourselves. And they say they're the people who prevent us from succumbing to moral relativism. I'm not hearing it from them. I'm sorry, it's insulting to be talked to in that way. The great recent governor of this state, Mr. Romney, wants to be president. Okay, there's a constitutional issue here. Mormons are supposed to say that they're prophet, as they call their leader. His word is sovereign over anyone else's, including the Constitution of the United States. So Romney has to say, and finally people did force him to answer the question, well, do you think that about your prophet? He said, no, the Constitution takes precedence in all cases. Fine. So to the extent that he's an acceptable person, it's to the extent he's not a Mormon. The discipline of secularism is necessary to civilize these superstitions. I hope very few of you begin your day by thanking God that you're not a female or a goy.
Well, who do you think in our society is winning this debate? The atheists, the new atheists, the religious? Where's the center of gravity going? And this will be the last question, I'm afraid.
I think a very large number of people don't, and they say this based on experience debating in a large number of churches and synagogues, go there for some of the reasons the rabbi gives. Community, Tocquevillian reasons, you might say. American communities, charities, self-help, often they run a school, this kind of thing. They don't really believe the holy books. They don't think they have been specially noticed by God or can expect any special favors from him. But they see, as it were, no harm in it. And there's a great deal of schism among those who do believe, an enormous amount of schism. So when people say in opinion polls that, or when you read that 90% of Americans believe in the virgin birth and in Satan and so forth, I don't believe it at all. I don't believe it, and I don't believe people who had doubts about it would tell them to someone who rang them up in their kitchen on the telephone either. I think that underneath this there's a huge crust of doubt and a great resentment against American theocrats. If you wanted to know how to piss off an American Protestant in the South, say, oh, are you one of those Jerry Falwell people? They hate that, rightly.
Do you think you're winning then? You
Well,
think?
no. I think that the supposed religious monolithic nature of America is grossly overstated. It doesn't describe reality, and it is certainly true, as one of the questioners mentioned, that the number of those who say not that they're atheists, we're still a very small minority, but those who say that they have no faith and no allegiance to any church has doubled in the last few years, and that's according to a decent opinion survey, the Pew one, not a random poll.
Two questions for Mr. Hitchens. The first one is, I was taught by a physics professor that if you go back to the Big Bang, beginning of the universe, in the first 1 to the 61st of the first second, the entire universe is in a tiny amount of space, and at that size, space and time can cross. And his point was that the whole universe came into existence out of a hiccup in the space-time warp, and therefore it's just kind of a big accident that we were here. And so my question is the same one that I posed to him that day: why is there a space-time warp? Which leads me to the second question, which is, wouldn't it make more sense that there would be nothing? Should be no universe, there should be no space-time warp, there should be none of us, and unless we're hooked into the Matrix right now, we seem to be here. And so...
You take that as an argument for God? Is that what you're saying?
For something. There's a great mystery at the core of the universe, and then why are we here is the second question, to argue those out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I'd commend to you someone who's much more expert on this subject. I started by mentioning Lawrence Krauss's lecture on a whole universe from nothing. But where's the grandeur, where's the divinity in the hiccup? And who produces the hiccupper? All you get from this is an infinite regression. Who creates this creator? It gets you nowhere. And again, if you do make the assumption, which I can't dispute or certainly cannot refute, that there is a first cause or an uncaused cause, it still doesn't mean that there's a God who takes sides, answers prayers, enjoins morals.
I didn't ask about that.
No.
Right.
So I'm afraid you compel me to somewhat to repeat myself.
Can I just ask a quick question
Yes.
about what you just said? If it's an assumption that you can't refute, which I understand, I think everybody here would say you can't prove that there's not a God, but that doesn't mean that there is one. But if it's an assumption that you can't refute, why is it that when someone says, I believe that it is true, do you say they're lying?
I didn't say that they're lying.
You said to me, when someone stands at
I say
when you lie,
someone
yes.
who goes to tell a child that if they don't behave well, they'll go to hell.
That wasn't the example that we
someone
used.
who goes to the deathbed
and says that I believe that there's a world other than this one.
You're going to a better place is I think a charlatan, a nauseating charlatan.
My jaw just dropped when I read this. He's got an excuse for this quantum indeterminacy thing. He says, this sort of sly intervention, he argues, is vital to the Creator's project. Again, he must know the Creator's project somehow, but he doesn't tell us how. If God were to regrow limbs for amputees, for instance, if God were to perform the sort of miracles demanded by atheists as proof of his existence, the consequences would be disastrous. Okay, the disastrous consequences aren't for the amputee, who would probably be very grateful. They are disastrous for the Catholic Church. Suppose that it was common knowledge that if you were a righteous person and of great faith and prayed deeply, all of a sudden your limb would grow back, he says. That would reduce God to a kind of supernatural force. And by pushing the button labeled prayer, you could accomplish anything you wanted. So far sounds great, okay? But he asks, what would that do to moral independence? This is the disastrous consequence. That having access to something that would make something powerful and useful might make us morally compromised. Apparently, Ken Miller does not use a washing machine and dryer. It leaves one a little breathless. As I said, Ken Miller is a scientist and he's a smart fellow, but this is what religion does to him. It leads him to make ridiculous leaps of illogic. His argument for why God doesn't heal amputees also reveals that he hasn't read another important work in the scientific literature. I speak, of course, of Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm sure most of you recognize Miller's argument as simply the Babelfish story. So the Babelfish is this incredibly improbable organism, a small fish that you can stick in your ear, which uses telepathy to act as a universal translator. And here's what Adam says about it. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance, that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes like this. I refuse to prove that I exist, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, says man, the Babelfish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance. It proves you exist, and so therefore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. Oh dear, says God, I hadn't thought of that, and promptly disappears in a puff of logic. Now, according to Ken Miller, then, there are no human amputees receiving miraculous recoveries at Lourdes. For the same reason, there isn't actually a Babelfish. Because if God actually did something useful, it would prove he doesn't exist. This is a God so powerful, so awesome, that he refuses to be bounded by the arbitrary requirement of making a goddamn difference in the world. Now, I have a couple of other problems with Miller's argument. Once upon a time, I did research on amphibian regeneration. You can take a newt and snip off a whole leg with a pair of scissors. Great fun in the labs. And you wait a few weeks to months, and it grows back. It's perfectly functional. It's normal. It's hard to tell it apart from the undisturbed limbs. I've done this a whole bunch of times, and I've never noticed that I was disproving God all that time. But I'm wondering now, perhaps that's why I'm an atheist. And all I have to do is get Miller into a newt lab, and we'll be able to get him on our side, too. Of course, there are other alternatives to that interpretation of the experiment. It may be that God just loves newts more than he does us. Or another horrifying possibility is that perhaps newt wish fulfillment has destroyed their moral independence. So clearly, we need to do more research. And of course, the other peculiar thing about Miller's argument that God works indetectably, that he can't be too obvious about the miracle making because he might undermine faith, is that he's a Catholic. He believes that God turned into a man and wandered around the Middle East turning water into wine, walking on water, curing leprosy, and raising the dead, which I think is much more impressive than growing back a limb. And doesn't that make God a supernatural force right there? If only God could vanish in a puff of logic, we'd be all done here. But he doesn't. And why? It's because the human mind is a product of evolution. It's an assortment of shortcuts and other utilitarian routines that are just good enough to allow us to survive and thrive. The mind is an engine that evolved to help us eat and avoid being eaten, to mostly keep us functioning cooperatively with other members of our tribe. It is not a remorseless engine of flawless logic. We will, for instance, accept all kinds of incredible nonsense if it will get us laid. And you all know this. What science is it's a process that helps us overcome the shortcomings of our minds. These are sloppy operations going on in our head, and what they are is a set of checks that allow us to operate more efficiently, more logically, when we're carrying out important actions. Well, maybe not as important as getting laid, but important actions that help us understand the world around us. They're not necessarily, so what we've got here is a world that is often counterintuitive to our brains, and we need a method to overcome the biases that we have, and that's science. Richard Feynman had this excellent short description of what science actually is. It's a one-liner. You should memorize it. Science is what we do to keep from lying to ourselves. It's a way of thinking in which we're constantly aware that we could be wrong in our preconceptions, and so continually define new tests of our ideas. It's a way of breaking out of the faulty modes and models that evolution has granted us. On the other hand, of course, Religions are the lies we tell ourselves to justify our biases. Rationalizations, which is all that religion can generate, do not represent new knowledge. At best, religion generates comforting noises to mask the fact that someone is starving to death, or is dying of cholera, or has had a crusader stick a sword in his chest. That is all it has accomplished in the millennia of its history. It has not improved our ability to grow food or treat disease, nor has it given us any new insights into our origins and existence. You would think that an omnipotent God, when dictating his holy book to his prophets, could have thrown in a few good, surprisingly accurate suggestions that would have shown that he actually knows a little bit more than the goat herders he was talking to. For instance, Jehovah gives us an account of the history of his creation in Genesis. It's only about a page and a half long. And okay, I will grant that maybe Iron Age goat herders have short attention spans, so you can't go on and on at length. It's also it's a bit repetitive, it's very poetic. It also gets everything completely wrong. If God had written it, why couldn't this all-knowing being have dispensed with the metaphor and poetry for one little short paragraph and written something like this as the first bit of Genesis? As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as consequently there is frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate in its new and modified form. That's brilliant. It's not just brilliant, it's beautifully expressed, and it's short, and it doesn't use any jargon. You know, maybe if they translated it in the right language, I don't see why some Mesopotamian goat herder couldn't have appreciated it. Or at the very least, you know, it would have made him think. And he could have sat there and contemplated it, and he might have started thinking about, well, let's do some experiments with the goats. Instead, the human race had to wait until 1859 when Charles Darwin wrote those beautiful words. To actually learn something deep and profound about the process that creates biological diversity, why couldn't we have gotten that little hint in the book of Genesis? I'd be a Catholic now. Okay, or if you think evolution would be a little bit too deep for these Iron Age goat herds, God could have at least told them, wash your hands. Three words. A very basic, useful bit of hygienic information. It would have saved many lives. We had to wait until the 19th century for doctors to figure this out. Instead, we've got a Bible that gives detailed orders to snip off the ends of our penises. I think that should win a prize for the most useless piece of medical advice ever. Okay, but this is the key point. What has most improved human life in the last few centuries? New technologies generated by this recently discovered process called science, which genuinely is a powerful way of knowing that really does generate lots of new knowledge. It is directly in opposition to religion as a way of knowing. Faith is not information. Belief is not sufficient to probe the universe. It is antithetical to critical examination and honest understanding. Adding the taint of religion to science does not complement our knowledge, never has to date anyway. And given that every example of religious apologetics combined with science that I've seen so far, from Ken Miller to Francis Collins to the BioLogos site to the fantasies of the Templeton Foundation, it's merely cluttered up our understanding with nuggets of pointless myth that eventually have to be tediously extracted. I don't see that religion will ever contribute to science. So science and religion are incompatible in all the ways that count. Science works, religion doesn't. Science will not allow the divine foot in the door, as Lewontin has said, because religion corrupts and misleads. Thank you.
So, with all this, ongoing obsession and scarring with religion, imagine my delight when I was, in fact, invited to Salt Lake City, Utah, to speak to a whole bunch of gay and lesbian Mormons. What could I do except call the ABC, say, "Get me a film crew, this is going to be a mindfuck." If you're lucky, you'll get a complete nervous breakdown live on telly. I tell you, we came this close. The whole experience is recorded in this book, which I will be selling tomorrow, but if any of you aren't going to be here tomorrow or can't wait, I've got a few copies with me now. I am shameless. It is called The Confession of an Unrepentant Lesbian Ex-Mormon, which is nothing if not an honest title of a book. It was a wild and scary ride, and I won't talk too much about it because it's all in the book. But one thing I did do was take advantage of the opportunity of being in a room full of ex-Mormons and some still practicing Mormons, and just check some theology with them to find out, some of the things my mother told me, if it was real or just what my mother made up. Because I don't know about other religious mothers, they lie. So I got to check with these people whether it was really true, as my mother told me, that on Judgment Day your pets will be given voices so that they can give evidence against you. I still lock the cats out of the bedroom. Even nastier. Last time I saw my mother, it was very intense and emotional, and we don't talk anymore, and she was sort of gripping me like she was trying to burn my image into her brain, because one of the nastier Mormon beliefs is that if you're in heaven and not all your family has made it, that's going to depress and upset you, and that's not what heaven's about. So they will wipe their memories of any recollection of the family members that didn't make it. You're not as funny as you think. Okay, but the one thing I really want to check with them, because this had enraged me a few years before, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. My mother had brought me up to believe that any naughty thing I did, any little white lie I told, would retrospectively make Jesus suffer more on the cross. Because he died for our sins, so if I sinned, I was adding to it. Now, I just wanted to check and confirm with them that that is not actually official Mormon belief. That is evidently quite a common little thing that Mormon mothers use to scare the crap out of their kids. And when I had first found this out a number of years ago, see, the thing is, like I say, the residual Mormon is still there, even no matter how much I try to kill it. And there have been times over the years where I've done stuff on stage where part of me's just gone, "Oh, sorry, Jesus." That must have really sort of arced it up a bit. Sorry, had to happen. So that little bit of guilt was still nagging away at me. And then one year, I told my lover about this story, and she just looked at me and went, "That's crap. No religion in the world believes that." And I got very angry. And it just so happened we'd had this conversation because it was Good Friday. And I was doing a show in the Comedy Festival. And the Comedy Festival always straddles Easter, and they always do shows on Good Friday, and I tell you, they're the weirdest shows going. There's only ever about 30 people there, 30 lonely little atheists come along on Good Friday. Although one year, see, I also have this thing where young teenage gays and lesbians bring their family along to see me, thinking that, I'll make it a bit easier for them. And one year, this young Greek girl brought in her grandmother, all in black, who just sat there the whole time. So I was performing on Good Friday. I was incredibly angry about what I had just been told, and I turned up at the venue, and there was, like I say, just 30 lonely atheists. And I did my gig, and right at the end, I finished up by telling this story about, how angry I was, and all these years I'd felt guilty about, making Jesus suffer more. And so I finished with, so here's my Good Friday message for Jesus. Squeal, little piggy, squeal! You sure got a pretty mouth, Jesus. Yes, and I delivered it much more angry, and the 30 atheists went, "Oh, that's a bit much even for us." And I don't do it too often on stage, and oddly enough, it's a story I didn't tell in Utah. But like I say, I am still morbidly fascinated by all this crap, and I cannot drag myself away from watching the Christian programming on telly. 'Cause I'm a bit of an insomniac, and let me tell you, the gates of hell open at about 3 in the morning. Some of the I used to have cable, and they had a program, a special Christian program for youth. Gobsmacked, jaw-dropping, befuddled, confused, and angry upon seeing such stuff as a band come on to sing a lovely, delightful, uplifting ditty for the kiddies called "I'll Never Be as Good as Jesus." And then watch this little Christian punk trying to be a rap guy, and this is word for word what he said at the end of a segment. "Hey, and if you want to have faith, but you're not quite there yet, why not try pretending for a while? Can't do any harm." Yes, I fucking can! Another one with a fiery southern preacher telling people how to confront atheists with the stupidest logic I have ever heard in my life. "When they say to you that there were dinosaurs 65 million years ago, simply say to them, 'Were you there?'" Do you know how easy it is to flick that around? Moses parted the Red Sea. "Were you there?" Jesus died and suffered for our sins. "Were you?" You get the point. And the other one, I think her name is Joyce Brown. She's on Australian telly at the moment. She's got the most amazing cat's bum face. I've never seen a more bitter, angry, twisted, tight woman in my life. Again, this is word for word. I will never forget these words as long as I live. People come up to me and talk about their feelings. "Oh, Pastor, I don't feel like doing that." "Oh, Pastor, but it feels so good." Pay no attention to your feelings. Your feelings are sent to you by the devil. What? It must be the drugs. She couldn't have said that. But oh, she did. But I tell you what, however bemused, gobsmacked, outraged and upset I get watching the Christians, I've never actually wanted to punch one. That took a New Age person. If I could be permitted just one slight tangent, those of you who have read my books or have seen me perform will know, also on that long list of labels, I'm also an incest survivor. I was sexually abused by my stepfather. Don't worry, it was 30 years ago. I'm over it. It's all right. I'm not going to cry. Cool. Just needed the context. And I've talked about my very first solo show. I talked about it on stage. And of course, by talking about it, I then opened up the opportunity for other people to talk to me about it. And one night after the show, I got buttonholed by a New Ager who proceeded to tell me, "Oh, your stepfather must love you so much. He must be like your soulmate. You've probably been tied together for so many lives. The fact that he loved you so much that he could incarnate in this role to teach you this beautiful lesson." closest I've ever come to punching someone in the face. I don't think she had any idea how offensive it was. And so I would just like to give to you my very quick 20-second denunciation of the New Age. Feel free to use it in public. If everything happens for a reason, if everything that happens is meant to happen, and everyone is learning a valuable lesson, then the world is perfect. There is absolutely nothing we have to change. Fucking bullshit. Okay, while you're at it, I'll also give you my 10-second Christian denunciation. It's even easier. Everyone forgets Jesus wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew. Christianity started much later with St. Paul. Now, as far as Jesus knew, he was fulfilling Jewish prophecy. The Jews didn't believe him, so why should we? This is where I want to hold up a banner going, tee-hee-hee. Okay, now I want to tell you about my most successful experiment in atheism. I've got to set this up a little bit. In the mid-90s, I was doing a show with two other comics here in Melbourne at a pub called the Prince Pat, nice, small, intimate little venue. The promise to the audience was that every week we would do all new material. Nothing would be repeated. And it was my job each week to research and destroy a different religion. I had fun. I did the Buddhists, I did Scientology, I even had a bit of a bash of the Jainists. Look them up later. And then one week, the guy who was directing it said, we're going to have a band on next week, so how would you like to use the band? And I thought, ooh, I can finally run my experiment. Because I'd been thinking, I don't do characters in my comedy, I'm just myself and I talk, but the one character I have written is the atheist preacher. Because I thought, how much fun would it be to take all the tricks of the trade that a fiery Southern Baptist preacher uses, you know, the call and response, the whispering and the shouting, the threefold repetition, to have a band and a choir behind, you know, all the tricks of the trade that they use. What if I used them all and turned it to atheism? So I wrote this quite wonderful piece, quite frankly. And I practiced with the band. They were doing a lot of nice sort of organ work underneath. It was about a 20-minute piece, and they worked up towards the end. They were playing Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord from Godspell, except it was Prepare Ye the Way of the Lobster. Let me explain. See, I've done this whole thing about people ignoring this life that we have now, the only one we know we actually have, putting it off, discounting it, and concentrating instead on the next life. The new life, the better life, the perfect life, the life with God. And that to me, that is like refusing a wonderful meal of lobster and saying, no thank you, I'm waiting for the invisible dessert. Thank you. So I worked up towards, you know, the whole thing led towards, at the end, basically going, fuck dessert, eat the lobster. And it all worked surprisingly well. People were going nuts, and at the end, friends told me that at the back of the venue, there were people actually shouting, hallelujah, fuck God! And I gotta tell you, it was as much fun as you get from watching me perform. I have a lot of fun watching my audience sometimes. I love seeing the brains explode. And I was watching carefully that night, and it was the most amazing experience in that for the first minute, the audience was looking at me going, what the hell is she doing? And then after a couple of minutes, oh, I see, very good. Oh, yes. Very clever, good on you. And then a couple of minutes later, there was a very limp sort of Aussie, amen, sister. Ooh. A little bit embarrassed. Forgot I had a lapel mic, sorry. But about 10 minutes in, this weird moment happened where one person let rip, like really got into an amen, sister. And it was like it gave the rest of the audience permission, because they went nuts. Absolutely nuts. Screaming, shouting, waving around. And it was the sort of venue where there's no backstage. So when I was finished, there was an intermission, and I walked off stage and threaded my way through the venue to the back where my friends were, and had the wonderful experience of watching people shake their heads, going, whoa. And one guy actually looked at me and said, "That stuff works." Yes, that's why they use it. Oh, yes, don't be fooled. It was a very, very interesting night, and it was a little bit scary to think that, you know, I'm a little bit charismatic, but I wouldn't call myself overpowered. But the fact that I could take a room full of strangers with presumably a wide range of beliefs and get them charged up to that extent within 20 minutes, that's what we're fighting. That's the things we're sort of working against. You know, there is a reason that every religion in the world at some point has messed around with candles, drumming, incense, repetition, chanting. It works. So I think we should use it too. I think you guys should sponsor me to get a show together. We'll get a little band, we'll get a little choir, and we'll do us an old-fashioned atheist revival tent show. Where's Kath Devaney? Are you in here, Kath? Kath Devaney? No. Well, I was going to invite her to tag team preach with me, but obviously she's not watching, so never mind. But I tell you, we've actually got the material. I put a bit of thought into this. I even have a hymn that pretty much everyone in the English-speaking world could join in with, courtesy of Monty Python. In case you don't know it. All things dull and ugly, all creatures short and squat, all things rude and nasty, the Lord God made the lot. So, you know, we've got the hymns, we could do readings from the unholy books of Dawkins, Hitchens, and Huxley. In fact, I have a perfect bite-sized reading here, which I want to use for you tonight, because I think it's my favourite atheist quote of all time from Mr. T.H. Huxley in my book, shameless plug again. Man is so intelligent that he feels impelled to invent theories to account for what happens in the world. Unfortunately, he is not quite intelligent enough, in most cases, to find correct explanations. So that when he acts on his theories, he behaves very often like a lunatic. Thus, no animal is clever enough when there is a drought to imagine that the rain is being withheld by evil spirits, or as a punishment for its transgressions. Therefore, you never see animals go through the absurd and often horrible fooleries of magic and religion. No horse, for example, would kill one of its foals in order to make the wind change. Asses do not bray a liturgy to cloudless skies. Oh yeah! And you know, I could do healings. Although my laying on of hands will be very different to the Christians. Could you imagine touring a show like that? Could you imagine taking it to America? I can almost feel the noose around my neck already. Okay, now I'm running a little bit late, but there's just a couple of things I wanted to throw at you before I go. I would like two weather-related stories or observations. The storms last weekend, for those of you who don't know, once in a century, huge, massive hailstone, blah, blah, blah. Could you imagine what the Christians would have said if the conference had been last weekend? We would have got the blame. It would have been God's wrath for defending, bringing atheists to Melbourne. The fundies would have taken it very seriously. The media would have played with it as a joke and gone, "Oh, maybe we'd better warn other cities not to host the atheists." I missed a bullet. I think we dodged a PR bullet by having it this weekend. In fact, I am sorely tempted to call it the first atheist miracle. Even though I feel dirty saying it, I just couldn't resist. The other weather-related thing, this is to annoy your North American friends. Not the Canadians, just the Americans, you know who I mean. Because has anyone else noticed that the strip of land across the centre of America known as the Bible Belt is also pretty much Tornado Alley? It's almost like God is saying to the Christians, fuck off. And I apologise for being so crude, but the fact of the matter is God has form in this department. I believe in Genesis it actually says, go forth and multiply. Go and get fucked. Okay. Thank you. Come and find me later. It's a bloody good read. It's really good, and it's only $20. What I want to leave you with is one final quote. Part of me, after 25 years of kicking God in the nuts, is, I'm a bit over it. I'm a bit over taking it seriously. I'm a bit over arguing. There is no facts and evidence to argue against. What's the point? I think there should be more mocking. Let's just not take them seriously. The more seriously you take them, the more authority they have. I say, fuck yours. And in that department, I wanted to bring in and mention, I don't have many political heroes. I have two, basically. George Orwell. Pretty obvious, thank you, yes. His honesty, his humanism, and the fact that he was always willing to look past labels. I love him. The other one may surprise you. Actually, I think my main political god is the Hollywood actor Zero Mostel. I don't know if you've heard this story, but during the 1950s, when McCarthyism was going rampant in America, Zero Mostel was hauled before the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and when they put the question to him, echo of the Inquisition, they went, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Zero Mostel looked at them, rolled his eyes and said, we're not allowed to tell. That's what we need more of. Thank you very much and good night. Thank you.
You have to keep putting pressure on bad ideas, because that's the thing about bad ideas. They don't respond well to pressure. People have internal contradictions in their lives that they can notice because they're, do you think prayer works? Many people say yes, absolutely, I think prayer works. And then you say, okay, well, we have a new airline where the pilots are just going to rely on prayer to land the planes. Tickets will be cheap, and you can sign up. Who's going to sign up for that airline? If the pilot comes over the PA system and tells you that he's convinced that prayer is all he needs to land this plane, you're just going to see just stark terror on the faces of even the most religious people. And so that's a contradiction that can be pointed out. And we have to do that 1,000-fold and just keep doing it. But as you say, global warming, evolution, these are the jury's not out on questions, and many people just don't subscribe, and it's a failure of conversation.
Richard P. Feynman once brilliantly said, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And today, I have a few questions myself that I wish I could ask religion, if religion could speak, that is. And these are questions that I know for a fact even the most devout believers have asked themselves at some point, but may not have had the balls to ask them out loud, man. you know? So let's jump right in, man. The Bible describes God as all-powerful and all-knowing. But this often makes me wonder, man, why then would it take such a being 6 days to create the universe? And even more interesting, why would an all-powerful God need to rest after that period? Is he capable of fatigue? Because if he is, that wouldn't all-powerful-ish, would it be, man? Then later on, after creating the first 2 humans, the same all-knowing God goes on to ask Adam and Eve where they were and if they had eaten the fruit. Shouldn't he have had answers to both questions already, man? But let's assume these were rhetorical questions meant to test Adam's integrity in the Bible. God then later on goes on to claim in Genesis 6:6 that he regretted to have created men. And that never made sense to me, man, because an all-knowing being would have known what choices his creation would go on to make, man. So why the regret? He or she could have simply not created man to begin with and saved himself the trouble, man. You know what? Scratch all that, man. Let's go back to the beginning. If God is all-knowing and all-powerful and also the one that created everything, then why the hell did he create the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the first place, man? What could have been possibly the purpose if he knew there was a chance that his precious creation would be tempted to eat from it? You could easily say, of course, that Adam and Eve had the choice to either eat from the tree of knowledge or not. But still, that doesn't answer why God created it in the first place. Even worse, why did the same all-knowing and all-powerful God choose to place the tree right in the middle of the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve resided, man? Doesn't this sound like entrapment 101, man? Which wouldn't be cool since God is supposed to be all-loving and all-caring, man. Another thing that has never settled with me is how, according to the Christian tradition and belief, we are all born sinners with sinful, selfish natures thanks to the original sin that Adam and Eve committed. The Bible even does say in Psalms 51 verse 5, and I quote, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me." And so it begs the question, if God is all just and fair, then how could he possibly make the rest of humanity bear the cross of sin undeservedly, man? Undeservedly. What the undeservedly, man. None of us asked Adam and Eve to get curious in the garden, so why does everyone born after them have to bear that responsibility, man? And if you read the Bible, this problem doesn't apply just to the original sin, because in Exodus 20 verse 5, the Bible says, and I quote, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the God your Lord, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generations." So Christians, what about that screams fairness and justice, man? Even we sinners know better than to design a judicial system that punishes children for the sins of the parents. And while still on this subject of God punishing people for the sins committed by other people, I have several worries that I found throughout the Bible. Why did God murder 70,000 people, Israelites, by inflicting them with disease simply because one man, David, conducted a census? And as if that isn't enough, not only did he not end the life of the man that committed the transgression, David, the cause of all this, would go on to become one of God's favorite children. And now David is supposed to be one of the most respected figures in the Bible. So God did see it fit to forgive the offender, but the 70,000 people that had no part in the crime had to die in some of the most excruciating ways, man. Make it make sense, my friends. Oh, the other example, let's head to Egypt, where God enacted the 10 plagues. One of which was murdering all firstborn babies in the country because God had a vendetta against Pharaoh. Now, hear me out, guys. Not only did every parent in Egypt lose their child for something Pharaoh did, it wasn't even Pharaoh that did what we think he did. I really hope you're following, man. Because the Bible clearly states that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh so he wouldn't release the Israelites even if he wanted to, just so God could show his glory. Then the same God somehow goes on to kill probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children, simply because his mother, Pharaoh, did not let the Israelites go. Does it track for you guys, man? Now, some people have also often wondered why it is that God preaches forgiveness over and over again in the Abrahamic text, but he couldn't forgive Adam and Eve for their first transgression. And personally, man, I don't find that surprising, man, because if the Bible teaches us anything, especially the Old Testament, it's that God is anything but forgiving, man. Do you guys remember the guy that God struck dead on the spot because he dared stop the Ark of Covenant from falling. The guy thought the Ark of Covenant was about to fall, so he reached out to stop it and make sure it's okay. I mean, if a good, well-intentioned deed like that resulted in wrath from the Most High, what are you guys expecting to happen to Adam and Eve, man? Anyway, moving on to the story of Cain and Abel. We've all wondered this before, and it's actually one of the first questions about the Bible that laid the foundation for my living organized religion. Because according to the Bible, Cain went to the next village called Nod and found a wife who bore him a son. Weren't they supposed to be the first children on earth, man? And within the same book, Cain also tells God that he is worried anyone he comes across will kill him. Where did all these people come from, man? Was God cheating on us and creating other people on the side? Let's move on, man. In 1 John chapter 4 verse 8, the Bible says God is love. And in 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4, love is patient and kind. Love knows neither envy nor jealousy. And if those two verses are true, then how come in Exodus chapter 20 verses 5 the Bible claims God is a jealous God? Doesn't deductive reasoning lead us to conclude that it's impossible for all three verses to be true simultaneously, man? But what do I know, man? So let's move on. As you all know, many questions have been posed about this specific story, such as how did Noah collect animals and humans that were only found in specific faraway continents, not humans, animals I mean, in continents like Africa, Australia, North America, etc. But let's assume that he was able to miraculously command kangaroos to swim across the Indian Ocean from Australia to the Middle East. Even then, how was he able to fit the millions upon millions of species of animals on this planet into his ark? Man, you do not need to be a mathematical genius to realize that this is physically impossible to have accomplished using the measurements given in the Bible. Don't get me wrong, the ark itself was huge, man, with gross dimensions of about 300 by 50 by 30 cubits. That's basically equivalent to 570 modern railway cars, which, as I said, is huge, man. But still, that isn't anywhere close to what's required to fit every single species of animal on earth, man. So yeah, that is definitely a question I wish someone would definitely answer. Anyway, that's all for today. What did you guys think about the conversations we've had today? I love you guys, and I'll see you again the day after tomorrow, man. Stay safe. Peace.